Welcome aboard, everybody. You see the blue around us. That means we're talking New York Giants football. We may even squeeze in the little Jets because we've got a very special guest today. We are brought to you by Northeast Roofing Professionals, nerpcny.com. And we'll hear a little bit more from our sponsor a little later in this broadcast. But without further ado, let's talk Giants and beyond with a guy who is steeped in knowledge, we might say. He's a columnist for The Athletic. He's written six New York Times best-selling books, for crying out loud. And he's definitely a New York sports insider and a jack of all trades. The one, the only, Ian O'Connor with us today. How are you, Ian?
Hey, gentlemen, how are you?
Good to be with you. Good to be talking about the Giants football offseason, and we're relevant, Ian. It's unbelievable. And that all comes down to the hiring of the head coach, which I know you've been covering from pillar to post. But the latest thing that you've done on this that intrigued us and wanted to bring you on our show is the fact that you had to sit down with John Harbaugh to talk about, dare I say, his first 30 days in office, which included early morning workouts, a call with John Mara, and many, many other interesting, insightful things. So let's go there. Let's talk about John Harbaugh getting that job and how important it is for the Giants to have a guy running the ship that matters. Let's just start with that overall question.
Yeah, thanks, Jim and Paul. And I think the one thing that stood out to me in terms of the response I got pretty immediately was Giants fans just like, wow, we didn't realize how close it was to not happening that last day on January 17th, that Saturday, when the phone rings in the Harbaugh household in suburban Baltimore at 3:15. And he's not sure if John Mara is going to say we've reached an agreement or not. He's thinking, well, if the Giants hold fast to their traditional power structure of the head coach reporting to the GM, he wasn't taking the job. That was a non-starter. And it just took until that Saturday afternoon for John Mara to say yes, because in the morning, Saturday morning, he hadn't gotten there yet. And so to his credit, obviously, John has been going through a lot with his cancer fight. And listen, the franchise has been in the family for over 100 years, and this is a traditional way of doing business. And it was difficult for him to get to a point where he said, okay, even though Tom Coughlin and Bill Parcells didn't have much of a problem reporting to a general manager, we're now going to have to modernize this franchise, make it more of a coach-driven operation, really for the first time, and give John Harbaugh what he needs to take this job, which is what ultimately John Mara did.
So let's get into the roles. So Donna Aponte gets hired, and she's in the mix thanks to John Harbaugh. He was a driving force, as you wrote in the column. And Pat Leonard of the New York Daily News responded that this means Joe Schoen has basically been relegated. He's been demoted, or whatever word you want to use, to handling scouting, while the rest of the building reports to Don. Don reports to John. John reports to ownership. Is this properly being sort of laid out here in that way? And what does that mean for Joe Schoen's role? What is his role now?
Well, first off, in terms of the rest of the building reporting to Aponte, hey, that may be true. I don't know. And Pat, obviously, He's been around the team a long time. Is a very good reporter. So if that's the case, then yeah. But even if that isn't true, and I suspect that it is, I think that you're seeing here people reporting to John Harbaugh. And frankly, I didn't know that. John told me that Dawn Aponte was reporting to him. I asked him how much he was involved in her hiring, and he said I was heavily involved in it because she's reporting to me. And so that was news to me, and I guess news to Giants fans as well. But it means that this is exactly what I said earlier. The Giants are now a coach-driven franchise for the first time. And frankly, it's hard to say that or believe it because you kind of assumed it was when Bill Parcells, his outsized personality back in the 80s, that the Giants were all about him. Yeah, but it was really George Young's team. And they didn't get along, but they made it work to the tune of winning 2 Super Bowls. But right now, John Harbaugh is the first person basically to be running that organization. Now, Joe Schoen, I think, is smart enough to realize that he needs to play along here. I think he'll be heavily involved in the draft and free agency, building the roster along with John. And frankly, I don't think on draft night it's going to come down to the two are at a stalemate and Harbaugh would have the decision, which of course he will. It's not going to get to that because they're going to be talking about these players and prospects weeks and even months before it actually happens. They're going to come to a consensus before they get into the war room on draft night. So I think that Joe Schoen realizes that this is probably the best thing that's ever happened to him in terms of being an executive in the NFL. If this works out and Harbaugh wins a lot of games and lo and behold wins a championship, that's going to put Joe Schoen in a great place 5, 6, 7 years from now in the NFL, a place that he doesn't occupy right now. So I do think he'll play ball, and he's a supplemental figure in the organization right now to Harbaugh, like pretty much everybody else.
Ian, if Harbaugh, again, if there ever was a stalemate in the draft room, for a random example, and it was between John and Joe Schoen, Harbaugh knows he has it literally written in his contract that he can make the final decision. But you say it's never going to get there. So if he's never going to use that power that he could flex to use, why was it so important to John to have written into stone and for it to be structured this way? Because obviously it was so important that you even said that, hell, if the Giants didn't bend the knee on this subject matter, well, John Harbaugh wasn't going to be the head coach of the Giants.
Well, it's a very good question, Paul, and that's why his agent, Brian Harlan, was still talking to the Titans Saturday morning, hours before he made the deal with the Giants, because it was very important to him. He had it in Baltimore, right? So if he didn't get it in New York, that's a little bit of a demotion, maybe a lot of a demotion. Yeah. And so he had it with Steve Bisciotti in Baltimore. And over 18 years, mostly of winning a championship, winning 13 postseason games, 193 games in all. For the most part, the Giants were losing in that period. Why would you, as a $100 million coach, enter an organization and answer to a GM entering the last year of his contract who had a losing record by a lot? So it didn't make any sense for him to report to Joe Schoen. And yeah, I think that there's no way he takes the job. Now, he wanted the Giants job. That was a dream job to him. I know before he was fired, he was looking at, okay, if I get fired, I don't think I am getting fired, but if it happens, he was looking at the teams that likely would have openings. He had the Giants at number one. So he really wanted this job, and he really wanted John Mara to come around and say, okay, you can report directly to me, which Mara did. So I think that's, again, Joe Schoen did a really good job in the recruiting process, because I think he realized, okay, this is actually going to be very good for my career, and I'm going to lose power here, no question about it. But 5-10 years down the road, if this works out, it's going to work out for me in a big way as well.
Well, Ian, I saw the hugs and kisses at the opening press salvo between Schoen and Harbaugh, and even posing together for pictures. You've been around this story. You just recently talked to Harbaugh. How would you describe the relationship between the two right now?
It's good. It's perfectly fine now. And obviously that could change, I guess, at some point. But I think that they both realize there's a lot at stake here. It makes sense to get along. And Schoen knows that if they're at a stalemate, Harbaugh is going to get his way. So I think that they'll work those things out before they get to draft night, before the final free agent decisions are made. But I think that John Harbaugh, what helps Schoen is Harbaugh is not the kind of guy to come in and just Bigfoot everyone in the building, even though he has that power. And he wanted it and needed it really, because in case there came a point where he was at odds with someone, Joe Schoen or someone else, he needed to know that I'm going to get the final say. So you want to have that in your hip pocket. But I think Harbaugh is the kind of coach who realizes, like, I don't want to really use that if I don't have to. So I think he's looking to work with people, not to Bigfoot them. I think that you look at his partnerships with Ozzie Newsome, who is one of the best to ever do it. You look at his partnership with Eric DaCosta. Yeah, at times it maybe got a little strained, but they were neighbors and really good friends for most of their time together. That was a very good functioning partnership. And I think he's looking to establish those professional relationships in the Giant organization. And it only makes sense for him to do that. And I think it'll happen.
Ian, I grew up in New York City. I'm a lifelong Giants fan. My family, we go back deep in history. I was trying to think through my mind's eye of a similar hire, if the Giants have ever had one. The closest I could come up with was Dan Reeves, who had a nice coaching career and then came into the Giants as a veteran, savvy coach. But we've never really seen this way with the Giants, especially with the power that Harbaugh has been given. How would you characterize this hire, and do you think it was a really, really good hire for the Giants when it's all said and done?
Well, I've made the point, Jim, that I thought it was that Harbaugh represented the most distinguished coach in terms of his record that the Giants have ever hired at the time of the hiring. Dan Reeves, you can argue, because he went to 3 Super Bowls, but he went 0-3. I think John Harbaugh's winning percentage was a little better than Reeves's at the point of their hirings with the Giants. And he won a Super Bowl, and Dan Reeves didn't. So to me, I'm going to give the edge to Harbaugh there. And Coughlin was an accomplished guy, of course, but he hadn't won and he did a great job in Jacksonville, particularly those early years. Getting that team right away to the AFC Championship game was an amazing thing. But no, Harbaugh is the most accomplished coach they've ever hired. So again, he knew that. He had the leverage really in the negotiations because he could have gotten the Atlanta job. He could have gotten the Tennessee job without question. And he was maybe a little lucky that Mike Tomlin decided to take a year off, because if the Giants had Tomlin as an option, maybe they would have had the leverage. So, but Tomlin is going to be away for a year. I think he'll come back pretty quickly. But that did help Harbaugh without question, because he clearly was the number one candidate in this cycle. And that's why he's the most powerful coach the Giants have ever employed.
Ian, this may be a little strangely worded, but why was it so important for the Giants to hold on to Joe Schoen? Because like Harbaugh, apparently if he won the battle of, hey, if I don't report to ownership, I'm not taking this job. I imagine if he didn't want Joe Schoen sitting in that seat, he could have flexed and picked someone that he wants. That's normally, when you reset, have the head coach and GM on the same timeline. But it seemed like it was important for the Giants to keep Joe Schoen in that seat. Why?
Yeah, it's a good question. I thought they should have made a change. I think 94% of the fan base probably agreed with that assessment, just based on the numbers. You just look at the record and say, hey, you don't get to stay if you have this record. You had obviously the good first year. And I know he believes, and Brian Dable as well, that that actually set them back in a strange way. But there's just too many losses and too many misses. He's had some hits. Obviously, Jackson Dart was a good move. And I really don't want to hear Giants fans saying that that's a Brian Dable draft pick.
Right.
At the end of the day, the GM, you get credit or blame for the people you pick. And he actually moved up into a position to draft Jackson Dart, and he listened to his head coach. So you give him credit for that. Okay, you want this player, I'm going to give him to you. And so I thought, actually, if I'm John Harbaugh, I saw that as a positive, that he listened to his head coach with that draft pick. So why? They think he's a very hard worker. They think that they had more talent than the record suggested. They thought, management did, that the problems were really more with the coaching than with the actual talent on the roster. And he's a grinder also. They really like the way he communicates with the head coach. So you put those things together, and they decided there are enough reasons to keep him. I disagreed with it, as most Giants fans did. But here we are. And I think he's lucky that Harbaugh, again, is the kind of guy who's looking to make things work. He's looking to keep people, not for reasons to get rid of people, much like John Mara. So I think that's why he's still in place.
Today's broadcast brought to you by our friends at Northeast Roofing Professionals. Let's just take 30 seconds, learn a little bit more about our friends from Northeast. Be right back.
Finding the right local roofing company can be tricky. You don't want to hire the wrong roofers, or you could end up spending a fortune on repairs. The pros at Northeast Roofing Professionals can ensure your home is protected by a strong and sturdy roof. Locally owned and operated, over 30 years experience, free estimates, and competitively priced. Don't settle for an inexperienced roofing contractor. Turn to Northeast Roofing Professionals. Discounts for military and first responders. Reach out and let them put a sturdy roof over your head. NERPCNY.com. NERPCNY.com.
Considering that we sleep nearly 1/3 of our lives, buying the right mattress is essential. At Box Drop Syracuse Mattress and Sofa Outlet, you'll get a unique experience, one that saves you 30 to 70% off retail prices on top-of-the-line mattresses like Sapphire Sleep. At Box Drop, you'll schedule a mattress fitting appointment and get one-on-one service directly with Paul, the owner. No middleman. Family-owned, huge savings, no-pressure sales designed to save you time and money. And now Box Drop Syracuse has sectional sofas and love seats as well, with prices designed to fit your budget. Box Drop Syracuse Mattress and Sofas. Set up your appointment today at boxdropsyracuse.com.
All right, we are back talking with athletic columnist Ian O'Connor, the Manchild Show with Boy Green Digital. Don't forget to pop that subscribe button. You can even be a member now of the 12th Manchild by clicking the join button, and there's the link right there, youtube.com/@MCShowDigital. Talking Giants with Ian O'Connor, who has recently interviewed John Harbaugh about his first 30 days in office, dare I say, kind of fun. One of the fun things he talked about, Ian, was the idea of the Canyon of Heroes parade. You know, what happens if they actually win another one of those rings, one of those championships? That was intriguing to me to hear him talk about, being on one of those big double-decker buses and, celebrating a Super Bowl championship. What did you take from that?
Well, I actually asked him about the vision of winning a Super Bowl in New York. And I remember, and I said this to him, I don't know how much you follow baseball, but CC Sabathia signs with the Yankees in the spring of 2009. I'm talking to him at spring training, and he starts telling me about this dream he keeps having of being in that ticker tape parade. And he described it in detail, what it felt like, what it looked like. And then, of course, they win the championship. So the next spring training, I asked CC if the reality matched up with the dream. And he said it was almost exactly the way I imagined it. And so I said, what's your Super Bowl parade, ticker tape parade dream? And he started to answer it. He goes, I don't know if there's a great value in answering this question, because I've stated that we're going to try to make the playoffs. I expect to make the playoffs in year one, talked about winning a Super Bowl. And the more you say those things, they get taken out of context. Maybe you're getting ahead of yourself a little bit. Yeah. But then he did say, Tom Coughlin told me that there is nothing like a ticker tape parade in New York. And so I have thought about it. And he goes, but what I'm really consumed with is, what does a team look like that's capable of pulling that off? So it's better for me to focus much more on the process of building a team that can do that can create a ticker tape parade, than focus on the vision of the parade itself, which I think makes a lot of sense. And as I was trying to get to earlier with as far as the quarterbacks is concerned, because obviously winning a Super Bowl and having that parade is really going to be dependent on Jackson Dart. Let's face it, that's 85% of the sport.
Sure.
Is that position. And John, I think, even though he's seen as an overseer and a CEO type coach, he did win a Super Bowl with a pure pocket passer, and then did develop Lamar Jackson, a complete opposite player from Joe Flacco, into a multiple MVP winner, and won a lot of games with him. So he's done it in a lot of different ways at the quarterback position, which I think is good. And now he has a dual threat quarterback, and he's got, beyond the think tank around him of former head coaches on the offensive side of the ball in Nagy and Callahan. And he's also got Willie Taggart, who is a great dual threat quarterback for Jack Harbaugh at Western Kentucky. And even though he's a running backs coach, he has some institutional knowledge of that position, and also being a dual threat guy. And I think he's going to help Jackson Dart as well. So there's a lot of institutional knowledge on the offensive side of the ball at the quarterback position surrounding Jackson Dart, which I think will help John Harbaugh, who has his own experience at that position, get to that parade if it happens. I think he's a guy at age 63 who could probably coach another 10 years. And so he just needs to win one ring in New York to own this city. And it's been so long, really, for all sports teams in New York. So let's see if he can pull it off.
One of the things I took away from your piece, Ian, was it feels like in the piece that John Harbaugh feels invigorated. And that was part of it. A lot of people say he's 62 and it's getting stale down there in Baltimore, but there seems to be a reinvigoration here. And this guy certainly gets up in the morning and stays up late at night, which is not, unusual for coaches in the NFL. That's for sure.
Yeah, actually 63. He's going to be 64 in September. So, but, he's a very young 63 turning 64 when the season starts. And I think he can go another 10 years. You just look at a guy who's working out like a madman every morning at 4:30. He's getting to the facility at 4:15, and he's doing squats over 400 pounds and just doing basically the things that the players are doing physically. So I think he looks younger than his years and has a lot of energy. And this was the right time to take on a new adventure. If he wasn't going to do it at age 63, when was he going to do it? At age 70? I mean, at some point it gets to be too late. So I think, although Belichick did it at North Carolina, it hasn't worked out so far. We'll see how that plays out. But I think that it was the right time to leave Baltimore. And frankly, the Ravens needed a new head coach too, a new voice for Lamar Jackson. And listen, Giants fans would sign up for this. Their disappointments happened in the postseason. And basically, he was getting the Ravens to the playoffs every year. They were losing in the playoffs. So if that's the biggest problem that the Giant fan base has, they'll sign up for that. And just based on what they've seen the last 14 years, I think that's a pretty good problem to have.
Again, we're speaking with the legendary Ian O'Connor here on the Manchild Show with Boy Green Digital. and columnist for The Athletic and an award-winning author and everything else in between. And as the resident Jets fan of the room here, Ian, I will be honest, when I saw Rex Ryan, Giants, I'm like, what in the world? It intrigued me greatly. And in your column, you wrote that they Rex Ryan and Harbaugh, spoke at length about the defensive coordinator position. So I have to ask you, Ian, how real was this? Did this almost happen where Rex Ryan was back in the NFL with Harbaugh?
The way John put it, it sounded fairly serious. He said, I talked to him at length, and he does have a great affection for Rex, obviously going back to their time together. Now, it was interesting in 2008 when John gets the Ravens job, Rex really wanted that job. Mm-hmm. And a lot of guys, prominent people on the defense, wanted Rex to be the head coach. So that was a problem in the locker room. And John Harbaugh had to try to fix that and win over those defensive players, which ultimately he did. So their relationship has been interesting over the years, but he knows Rex is an excellent defensive coordinator and was a really good head coach for at least a few years in New York with the Jets. So I was a little surprised that he made it seem like it was more serious than – I didn't even know they talked. I know he brought it up on WFAN as a possibility to talk to him, but I figured it was Denard Wilson or Jim Leonard. And I'm not sure Leonard ever really engaged with the Giants. I think Harbaugh maybe wanted him to, but I'm not sure that for whatever reason that was a job that was at the top of Leonard's list. But I think that Denard Wilson emerged over time as the leader in the clubhouse. And then Harbaugh told me he had a conversation with his successor in Baltimore, Jesse Minter, who really went to bat for Wilson. And that put him over the goal line, and Wilson became the DC.
All right, I want to get back to Ryan in a second, but what you just said is super interesting on the Jesse Minter. So let's get this straight. Harbaugh gets fired from Baltimore. Now he moves on. He's the Giants guy. Jesse Minter replaces Harbaugh in Baltimore. Jesse Minter gives a strong, push. Hey, Harbaugh, you may want to pick up this Denard Wilson guy. That'd be great. The guy who replaced him gave him the insights. Again, a guy that he had worked with. It's not like he didn't know him before, but Denard Wilson ends up being the DC with the Giants because of some insights from the other guy. Like, that's crazy, Ian, right?
Well, it's possible, Paul, that conversation happened right before Minter got the job. I'm not sure if it happened after he got it or right before, but he knew he was a serious candidate for that job, certainly. And yeah, that's the way the coaching business is. And relationships really matter in this league, and that's how people get ahead. And so Jesse Minter owes a lot to John Harbaugh. So does Mike Macdonald, the Super Bowl winning Mike Macdonald. And so John Harbaugh's coaching tree is actually now growing, and you got Monken in Cleveland, Minter in Baltimore. He's got a Super Bowl champion, Mike Macdonald, who was a coaching intern back around 2015 or 16. Right. So I think that that's something he's really proud of, that tree is growing. And he was part of Andy Reid's tree and still is. So it's nice to have that as well. But I think that was a case where a branch of that tree did help him find his defensive coordinator.
And going back to Rex real quick. So he's been out of the game since 2016. It's been a decade. But over the last 5 years, he's interviewed for 3 defensive coordinator jobs or spoke at length, depending on how you categorize the Giants conversation. So it's been Giants, it's been the Dallas Cowboys, it's been the Denver Broncos when Sean Payton got the job. Is Rex just, let me excuse the pun I almost just said. I was going to say dipping toes in the water, but that's probably, you should leave that in a different conversation. But that just, looking around that, is that just Rex just trying to dabble, but he's not serious about it? Do you think Rex is really done? I don't know if you can answer this, Ian, but like seeing him continue to interview over the last 5 years gives you the maybe he could make a comeback after a decade?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough. And starting out as a coordinator, I don't think it's impossible. And this is not exactly breaking news, but Rex likes attention. I think we all know that, right?
Really?
So, and listen, I think he's really good at ESPN. If I were him, I would just stay there and retire at ESPN. And but is it possible he can get a DC job in the next year or two? Yes, I think it's unlikely. But listen, Harbaugh made it seem like if Wilson, for whatever reason, didn't work out, and again, Jim Leonard didn't seem engaged with the Giants. I don't know. You look at the other candidates and then you measure them against Rex Ryan. You have to be secure, like a John Harbaugh, in your place as a head coach to take Rex on your staff. Yeah. Because just picture Rex every Thursday, whatever day it is, when he's talking to the media, he's going to act like the head coach when he's talking as the DC, right? So you have to be really secure in your place in the league. And I think John Harbaugh is, to even consider it. That's why I think it's unlikely, because there are not many figures in the NFL who would feel that secure in their own position to have him on their staff.
And Rex Ryan, by the way, folks, exact same age as John Harbaugh, 63 years young. I just looked it up. Right. Ian, I know you're working on a new project. When aren't you working on something new? Another book is in the fold, and it's about the 7-11 Giants. We all love to talk about that, taking down the Patriots. So tell us about this. You can see the tweet quote right there. Give me your thoughts on what this is all about, and what should people be looking forward to?
Right. I covered those championship Giants teams, and I think I'm not sure, had they not defeated the greatest quarterback and coach of all time twice in those Super Bowls, if I do the book. So I think Brady and Belichick are an important part of this 5-year period. I want to go back and revisit and study and really give football fans, not just Giants fans, a 5-year look at how a NFL franchise operates and how the Giants made history against the odds twice. And not only that, I've always been fascinated by the Greek tragedy that is the 2008 Giants. As you know, Jim, they were better than the 07 and 11 Giants. Yeah, and unfortunately, you had the Plaxico Burress incident. And Coughlin told me on the record, and this is not the kind of thing that he would ever really say on the record, but he did in this case. He felt the Giants would have won it all in 08 if that hadn't happened. So they were 10-1 when it happened. They won that Sunday to go to 11-1, and then it unraveled. They couldn't overcome that loss. And yeah, they could have been a dynasty. They could have gone 3 out of 5, 2 in a row. And so the story of those 5 years, to me, the 08 team is just as fascinating, if not more so, than the 2 championship teams. So that was another reason why I was drawn to this project.
I think a prediction, another New York Times best-selling book could be in your future, Ian O'Connor. Ian, any details you could share? When is this book? Not to put pressure on you, but I'm ready to read it already, Ian. And I know you got to write it first before I can read it. But any details on when this could be, when in the future? What's sort of the timeline here for this book?
Well, listen, as a columnist at The Athletic, I need to take my time with this one. And so when I'm not working full time for another outlet, and really most of my books, I have been working full time for somebody as a columnist, but there were a couple that I did when I wasn't, and that was a little easier, that process. So I'll space this out, and I want to spend my time and get this 100% right. So we're probably looking at start to finish a couple of years. And though I really want to try to make this one of the best football books ever written. And I have a lot of institutional knowledge being around those teams, covering those 2 games, covering the 08 Giants, writing a book about Belichick. So I have some knowledge of that side of the equation as well. And the way they looked at the Giants, they were Belichick. Listen, the Giants were his dream job. And the only reason he didn't get it was because George Young couldn't stand him. And so not beating the Giants at least once in those 2 games really hurt him. So I want to get into that a lot in this book as well. So I'm really looking forward to it. I'm excited about this book as any I've ever written. So I can't wait to get started.
Ian, my last question is, we talk regularly with John Schmelk, who's one of our Giants insiders. You know, John, I know he's interviewed you. And in an interview he did with you right around the time that Harbaugh was hired, you shared some funny stories or some fun stories of a visit you had to Harbaugh's house where you met him and his dad, and you learned about the competitive nature of this guy. I wonder if you could just give us a snippet from that. I thought it was really, really fascinating.
So I get to his house. Let's say I was supposed to meet him at noon, and before the interview started, he wanted to shoot hoops on his backyard court. So we start shooting, and I was a decent player, and I'm making more shots than he is by a lot. He's clanking a lot of things, and I could tell he was getting a little annoyed, so I started tanking shots. I started missing intentionally because I didn't want to start this interview.
You don't want to do that.
So I think I might have led the story with that. He was upset about that in a joking. Hopefully he was joking. I think he was. But what I included was before the interview started, he dragged me up to his shuffleboard table. It seemed like he'd been playing like 3 hours every day for 20 years and just blew me out of the water. I'd never played this game, and he had a scoreboard attached to it. It was like 100-2, but he was beating me 77-4 or whatever it was, and he kept keeping score. I was like, you don't have to keep ringing up the scoreboard every time you're blowing me out here. So he needed to beat me in something before we started that interview. And that's the Harbaugh way, right? And to this day, he swears I wasn't making more shots than he was on the court. And I said, not only was I making more than you, I started tanking shots. So anyway, but that is the kind of competitor he is. That's the reason he won a Super Bowl. And frankly, he outcoached his brother, right? At a time when, probably most people thought Jim Harbaugh was the more accomplished coach and the star of the family and the guy who played in the NFL at the premier position at a high level. John did not make the NFL, not even close. So to win that Super Bowl and to beat his brother, frankly, meant a lot to him. And so they're very competitive people. And I think that it's like taking this job. I know this is a cliche, but failure just can't be an option. He can't fail at this. And he really wants to be the first guy ever to win Super Bowls with different franchises. And to do it in New York, that's going to do a lot for his legacy. As you know, Mark Messier won 5 Stanley Cups at Edmonton, but the one everyone talks about is the one he won in New York. So I think if Harbaugh can pull that off here with the Giants, and we haven't had a championship on the in major sports in New York on the men's side since 2011, right?
Yeah, right.
And unless the Knicks do it this year, Harbaugh will have a chance in the coming years to end that drought. That would mean a ton to his legacy for sure.
It's fascinating to me, Ian, that Jim and John, they're both amazing coaches. They both have this pedigree. They both obviously grew up in the same family, but in comfortability in front of the media, it's like complete opposites. John is like so comfortable in his own skin. Jim is so oddly shaped around media and questions. What do you glean, if anything, from that? It's just an interesting thing for me. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, very different personalities. I think John coaches with more humanity. He's just like a kinder, gentler version of his brother.
Yeah.
But no less competitive. And I know that I think I had this in the story for ESPN.com back in 2016 when I visited his house. But after he wins that Super Bowl, Jim did not talk to him for a number of days there. So I believe it was Thursday after the game, and John's on the train to New York going on the Letterman show. And the phone rings, and it's Jim. And they talked about the game really for the first time. And Jim complained about some calls. And John also said, well, we had some bad calls against us too. And so John tells me that he realizes the only reason Jim called that day was he didn't want his brother going on the Letterman show and telling David Letterman, my brother hasn't talked to me. So he wanted to end that stalemate before he went on national TV and had that conversation with David Letterman. So
because you're going to get that question, right? Letterman's going to say,
of course.
Did you talk to him after the game? So I haven't spoken to him since.
Yeah, right. That'd be a story.
Hold on in this family.
But Jim, if you remember that week, Jim was a lot more tense than John was, talking about all the family stuff. And Jim really didn't want any part of that. And John embraced it. And I think it was almost fitting that he won the game because he realized to have brothers competing in the Super Bowl, you have to wrap your arms around that. You can't fight that. That is going to be the storyline no matter what. So let it be. And I think the person who was looser going into that game is the person who won that game.
Yeah, and way to handle that. The Harbaugh Bowl, wasn't it the same thing with the blackout in the middle of the game in New Orleans? Oh, my goodness. Wow.
I remember he saw after the blackout, they're getting ready to play again, and the Niners were on the field, I believe. They had the ball. But whatever, there was a situation where Jim was actually on the field, and he shouldn't have been, like in the huddle. And John went to the refs and said, hey, get him off the field. He's not supposed to be out there. So Ozzie Newsome, the GM of the Ravens at the time, told me that the greatest thing about that experience that week with John Harbaugh is you never would have known that he was coaching against his brother. He was the same person that week. And that was one of the reasons why they won that game.
Wow. Last one from me here, Ian, and you're uniquely qualified to answer this question with your history here in this market. Speaking of Eli Manning, that book you're going to be writing and covering, the most prominent moments of Eli Manning's career. He's a guy who's had 2 shots at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He's been rejected twice here. I'm going to be honest, it surprised me. I thought for sure he'd be first ballot, top 10 in every major statistical category. The 2 championships that you're writing a book about, I thought it was obvious, and I've been stunned by the response. We just had Gary Myers on last week poking his brain about it. I know you and Gary are close too. What do you make of all this? And is Eli Manning ever going to make the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I think he will, Paul. And I think that, listen, there's a logjam of candidates and they haven't let enough people in. And I think that obviously the process needs to change after Belichick didn't get in, which was just absurd. Yeah. So I think maybe not next year because Big Ben is probably ahead of him and he's eligible, I believe, next year. And I think the year after might be the spot for Eli to get in. And Breeze deserved to get in ahead of him, even though Breeze only won the one Super Bowl. I would have put Drew Brees ahead of him too. What hurts Eli is that career record, right? If you don't live in New York, if you haven't followed the Giants regularly, if you live in Tucson or Albuquerque or Ames, Iowa, and you look at, he's a 500 quarterback. Yeah. And why is he going into the Hall of Fame? Well, he's going into the Hall of Fame because he did it in New York and he was at his best on the biggest stage in sports twice. At the end of games, he needed game-winning drives to beat the greatest coach and quarterback of all time. So I do think the opponent matters there for him. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then the pressure of following Peyton, the pressure of playing in New York, the pressure of delivering twice at the end of Super Bowls, 2 times, to be an MVP twice at that game. I'm sorry. Those are tiebreakers that go in his favor. Now, I understand you can look at his 500 regular season career record and have a problem with that, and you should. And I can tell you that being around him for his entire career and being around those teams, that there are tiebreakers that really go in his favor. And he didn't have to go in on the first ballot. Maybe he shouldn't have. But the third or fourth ballot, he needs to get in without question. And let's hope it happens.
Well, Ian, really appreciate your time. I know how valuable it is. So thank you for giving us some of it today. Awesome to just talk to you about all these different things. Best of luck on the book. May be a little while, but I'll wait for it. I can't wait.
You're a legend.
Immediately on my summer reading list. Thank you, Ian O'Connor, for spending some time. We appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure, guys. Thanks for the kind words, and we'll do it again.